What is up, brothers? It's time for chapter 2 of Weapons of Influence, The Rule of Reciprocation by Robert Cialdini. It is the old give and take more. So to repay in kind what others have done for us or provided for us. Richard Leakey claims that we are humans because we build this up. We learn to share food and skill in an honor network of obligation. Cialdini claims it's a unique human feature, although I disagree. It's a primate thing. All monkeys do the same thing. It's giving and taking and sharing. It's the nuance of, is it going to be 50-50 or is it going to be 60-40 or 70-30? But in essence, that's what it's about. So, canines and felines surely allow their cubs and their pups to share, but the pack does not allow freeloaders for a long time. There is a general distaste for freeloaders, and on top of that, they have kind of been shifted out of the gene pool, because even if one gets away, if his children have the same genes and their children have the same genes of not being social sharers, basically being a bunch of asocial assholes, they do not make it through the chain of evolution. People who don't feel bad when they don't pay back are called psychopaths, and that's just because of a general lack of sympathy and empathy. It's like 2 to 3% of the population. So you have we could place this under the general concept of social capital. So I have a lot of money and I can give it to you. I don't expect this money back, but what I do expect is that you respect me, that you use your specific skill set to aid me when I call in a favor. It's called social capital, and people who build a lot of social capital have a strong social web, and that social web is basically proof of their genetic efficiency and practicability. Now, the rule of reciprocity is overpowering. If you're a normal, healthy person, you feel it all the time. For example, if we take the Hare Krishna society, they give out flowers, you are surprised by it, you take it. Once you've taken the flower, gift of kindness, they're going to ask you for a donation. And as a normal, healthy human being, you will feel obliged because they've given you something. If you do not donate, you will have a bad feeling, which is actually, we'll talk about the defense against this in the latter part. Now, some people are givers. A lot of men are givers. I take from you, then I give, and I give more. I'm building up social capital. So for example, today I give you 2 apples, tomorrow you give me 3 fish. In 2 days, I'll give you a basket and a piece of meat, and we build up. Now, successful politicians, for example, are not per se successful because they won the elections, it's because they've built up a lot of social capital over the years. Take Lyndon Johnson or Joe Biden. They are able to put out a lot of successful legislation because they call in favors of their efforts of all those years of giving favors. It's called log rolling. Now I want the watcher to be aware of politicians and doctors, because although they say these are smart, sophisticated people who are very objective and would never, ever be prone to favoritism, they are, because you are and I am. We work with the future in mind, and we want to reward our friends. We don't want funds from pharmaceutical industry or from fellow politicians to go to our rivals, because please don't forget there is an element of competitiveness in society, and especially when it becomes complex and it goes over the tribe, it does kind of become a zero-sum game. But that's a topic for another time. For example, you have the World War I snatchers. In trench warfare, it was extremely hard to get your army over the trenches. What was effective, however, was to send out a couple of squads, like very small squads, 1, 2, 3 people, or even one, to cross no man's land and to capture enemy soldiers. So there is a story of a German soldier who crossed the land, who caught a British soldier off guard, disarmed him. The British soldier was eating, and afraid, of course, he offered the German soldier a piece of his bread. Now the hungry German soldier accepted the bread, and then he was unable to carry out his mission because it would have gone against his humanity and his dignity. So he returned empty-handed. Now, as I took the example of the Hare Krishna society, surprise is an important element, because if you know that they're going to give you something and then they're going to ask for a donation, it loses its effect. So they give you the flower out of nothing, and then you take it. Once you've taken it, the reciprocity rule becomes, which is overpowering, becomes in effect. Healthy people dislike being in a state of obligation. Therefore, they will do extra effort to get rid of it and to repay what was given to them. This is a combination of two things: internal discomfort as a healthy human being, but also external shame. We don't want to be seen as freeloaders or profiteers, because once again, that's not what we are. We are very tribal creatures, very communal creatures. We expect each other to carry our own load, but we also know and realize that there are people who are disadvantaged. The children, the handicapped, the elderly. It's not a 50-50. Successful people are those people who not only carry their own load, but also take a bit of the load of other people. Which the point of life is basically to carry your own weight and to enjoy it. So, but that's a different topic. It's a snowball effect. What I mean by that is, I want to give more than I received. As I took with the example of the food, I give you 2 oranges today, you give me 3 apples tomorrow. And that is how we build civilization. Take the example of a guy buying a girl a drink in a bar, which I really strongly disadvise against, because it does not work. But the same thing goes into it that, well, it's actually a very sad thing if you buy a girl a drink in a bar, because she's basically using you and exploiting you, and she doesn't respect you. But it's a topic for another time. So long-term relations have an asymmetrical symbiosis. You have your friends, and there's kind of expected that although we have different skill set and different strengths, that we contribute an equal amount. But what I mean with an asymmetrical symbiosis is a parent-child relationship. The parents gives and give and give and give, while the children take and take and take. In previous civilizations, in the previous society, the children were then expected to take care of their parents, but society today is not in a good state, and it's only going to get worse, but it's a topic for another time as well. So, although persistent inequity between friends will lead to long dissatisfaction, and I'm afraid that eventually the situation will deteriorate, but that is for yourself to figure out. There is an element of competitiveness in life. What I mean with that is, you can't have it all, and you need to make compromises and mutual concessions. So it's the art of negotiation. Are we going to do it 50-50? No. But if I can do 50-50, 45, then I kind of won. And that is how people get rich, I suppose. So there is a rejection, then retreat element. So I'm asking you to give me $20, and you say no. And then I'm asking you for $2, and suddenly the $2 relative to the 20 is pretty easy, which is how a lot of sales tactics work. You want to buy a piano, so I first bring you to a 3000 superclass model, and then I bring you to the $500 model, and the $500 is gonna seem pretty cheap compared to the 3000, although your initial intent was to only spend $300. All these things are very practical and interesting, so I can seriously recommend reading the book Weapons of Influence by Robert Cialdini. If I'm a salesman and I call you, I can try to sell you a product, but you don't need it, so you refuse. Then I'm gonna go a step lower. I'm gonna ask you, do you know some friends who might be interested or some referrals? Because when you call those friends and you use referrals, you're basically part of the social web and your odds of selling increase enormously. So you have to be very careful with reciprocal concessions and perceptual contrast. Because, for example, I myself am kind of sensitive to be tricked because I care too much. And once I sold my car, the price was fixed at 2.7k, and the buyers, who were like a bit shady. First of all, they were 2 hours late, and I was late for work, which gave me a lot of stress. Should have made me angry, and it should have made me call off the deal and say fuck them, but I didn't because of other circumstances. Not only that, but then they were also hassling of the price, although I made clear I didn't want it. And they used like every sleazy sales tactic in the book, and they basically managed to get it down by 300 euros, which I still blame myself for every day, but I guess it's not gonna happen twice. So you have to be careful of the reciprocal concessions and perceptual contrast, because basically you have a fixed price, and because of the social interaction and the context, you might decrease it. What I mean with concessions is, this is what I want, this is what you want, yeah, but the deal is off. It's not gonna happen. So I'm gonna hassle a bit of the price, and you're gonna come over here, and we'll meet somewhere in the middle. If this appears as fair, the deal is eventually gonna finish in an equilibrium where everybody feels good. And by perceptual contrast, I already explained you can go to buy a piano, and then they first show you the expensive, or a car, you can buy a car, they show you the expensive models, and then the lesser expensive models are gonna be perceived as cheap and a good deal only because you've seen the more expensive ones. So for example, you're planning to buy a Range Rover of 100,000, which is a lot, but then they say like, you want this option and this option and that option, and eventually you get like 130,000. So there's a 30,000 that you basically did not need to spend that you spend. It's like called upselling, but that is not the point of this talk. So it's called rejection, then retreat. You start big and you go small and smaller until you have the thing. So you have to be careful. A good sales tactic would be like, you have to have a fixed price in your head, and then you have to also be aware of what you want, so know thyself, and you also have to be aware of the other ones. So two important things are responsibility. If people contribute to the contract, if they make it and build it, they're so much more likely to fulfill it and to stick with it. It also has a general feeling of satisfaction with it. So now we're basically arriving at the most important part of the video, which is the defense against the rule of reciprocity. Because the world isn't fair, and you should not expect it to be fair. It is not. It starts with knowing yourself and to understand the nature of your opponent. As I said, it's about mutual concessions and not being tricked into it, and also being aware that your brains work in relation. So if you are shown something expensive and then something cheaper, it's gonna appear cheap just because, for example, if you have an attractive woman and a mediocre woman in kinds of attractiveness, the mediocre woman is gonna appear uglier, although she's not, just because she's juxtaposed next to it. We all fall for these kind of cheap, superficial tricks. But if you're aware of it, it's gonna help you a lot. So I guess the most important thing to know is to know that there are people who exploit, there are exploiters and predators, that there are salespeople, but there are of course also genuinely good, generous people. And don't confuse these. You know, there are individuals who play fair and want to have a mutual symbiosis that's good for both parties. So I want you to be aware of the tricks, of the devices, and of the artificial designs. Keep in mind the element of surprise is not on your side in this context. And to finalize it, I want to tell you that exploitation attempts should be exploited by you, and you should not feel bad about it. So, this was my summary of Chapter 2 of Weapons of Influence, The Rule of Reciprocity by Robert Cialdini. I hope you've learned something. Peace out.